Chapter 36 of Tess of the d'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the d'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Chapter 36. Clare arose in the light of a dawn that was ashy and furtive, as though associated with crime. The fireplace confronted him with its extinct embers, the spread supper table, whereupon stood the 2 full glasses of untasted wine, now flat and filmy, her vacated seat and his own, the other articles of furniture with their eternal look of not being able to help it, their intolerable inquiry what was to be done. From above there was no sound, but in a few minutes there came a knock at the door. He remembered that it would be the neighbouring cottager's wife, who was to minister to their wants while they remained there. The presence of a third person in the house would be extremely awkward just now, and being already dressed, he opened the window and informed her that they could manage to shift for themselves that morning. She had a milk can in her hand, which he told her to leave at the door. When the dame had gone away, he searched in the back corners of the house for fuel, and speedily lit a fire. There was plenty of eggs, butter, bread, and so on in the larder, and Clare soon had breakfast laid, his experiences at the dairy having rendered him facile in domestic preparations. The smoke of the kindled wood rose from the chimney without like a lotus-headed column. Local people who were passing by saw it, and thought of the newly married couple, and envied their happiness. Angel cast a final glance round, and then going to the foot of the stairs, called in a conventional voice, "Breakfast is ready." He opened the door, and took a few steps in the morning air. When, after a short space, he came back, she was already in the sitting-room, mechanically readjusting the breakfast things. As she was fully attired, and the interval since his calling her had been but 2 or 3 minutes, she must have been dressed, or nearly so, before he went to summon her. Her hair was twisted up in a large round mass at the back of her head, and she had put on one of the new frocks, a pale blue woollen garment with neck frillings of white. Her hands and face appeared to be cold, and she had possibly been sitting dressed in the bedroom a long time without any fire. The marked civility of Clare's tone in calling her seemed to have inspired her for the moment with a new glimmer of hope, but it soon died when she looked at him. The pair were, in truth, but the ashes of their former fires. To the hot sorrow of the previous night had succeeded heaviness. It seemed as if nothing could kindle either of them to fervour of sensation any more. He spoke gently to her, and she replied with a like undemonstrativeness. At last she came up to him, looking in his sharp defined face as one who had no consciousness that her own formed a visible object also. "Angel," she said, and passed, touching him with her fingers, lightly as a breeze, though she could hardly believe to be there in the flesh the man who was once her lover. Her eyes were bright, her pale cheek still showed its wonted roundness, though half-dried tears had left glistening traces thereon, and the usually ripe red mouth was almost as pale as her cheek. Throbbingly alive as she was still, under the stress of her mental grief the life beat so brokenly that a little further pull upon it would cause real illness, dull her characteristic eyes, and make her mouth thin. She looked absolutely pure. Nature, in her fantastic trickery, had set such a seal of maidenhood upon Tess's countenance that he gazed at her with a stupefied air. "Tess, say it is not true! No, it is not true!" "It is true." "Every word?" "Every word." He looked at her imploringly, as if he would willingly have taken a lie from her lips, knowing it to be one, and have made it by some sort of sophistry, a valid denial. However, she only repeated, "It is true." "Is he living?" Angel then asked. "The baby died." "But the man?" "He is alive." A last despair passed over Clare's face. "Is he in England?" "Yes." He took a few vague steps. "My position is this," he said abruptly. "I thought, any man would have thought, that by giving up all ambition to win a wife with social standing, with fortune, with knowledge of the world, I should secure rustic innocence as surely as I should secure pink cheeks. But, however, I am no man to reproach you, and I will not." Tess felt his position so entirely that the remainder had not been needed. Therein lay just the distress of it. She saw that he had lost all round. "Angel, I would not have let it go on to marriage with you if I had not known that, after all, there was a last way out of it for you, though I hoped you would never—" Her voice grew husky. "A last way?" "I mean to get rid of me. You can get rid of me." "How?" "By divorcing me." "Good heavens, how can you be so simple? How can I divorce you?" "Can't you, now I have told you? I thought my confession would give you grounds for it." "Oh, Tess, you are too childish, unformed, crude, I suppose. I don't know what you are. You don't understand the law. You don't understand." "What? You cannot?" "Indeed I cannot." A quick shame mixed with the misery upon his listener's face. I thought," she whispered. "Oh, now I see how wicked I seem to you. Believe me, on my soul, I never thought that but you could. I hoped you would not, yet I believed, without a doubt, that you could cast me off if you were determined, and didn't love me at all." "You were mistaken," he said. "Oh, then I ought to have done it last night. But I hadn't the courage. That's just like me." "The courage to do what?" As she did not answer, he took her by the hand. "What were you thinking of doing?" he inquired. "Of putting an end to myself." "When?" She writhed under this inquisitorial manner of his. "Last night," she answered. "Where?" "Under your mistletoe." "My good! How?" he asked sternly. "I'll tell you, if you won't be angry with me," she said, shrinking. "It was with the cord of my box. But I could not do the last thing. I was afraid that it might cause a scandal to your name." The unexpected quality of this confession, wrung from her and not volunteered, shook him perceptibly. But he still held her, and letting his glance fall from her face downwards, he said, "Now listen to this. You must not dare to think of such a horrible thing. How could you? You will promise me as your husband to attempt that no more." "I'm ready to promise. I see how wicked it was." "Wicked! The idea was unworthy of you, beyond description." "But, Angel," she pleaded, enlarging her eyes in calm unconcern upon him, "it was thought of entirely on your account, to set you free without the scandal of the divorce that I thought you would have to get. I should never have dreamt of doing it on mine. However, to do it with my own hand is too good for me after all. It is you, my ruined husband, who ought to strike the blow. I think I should love you more if that were possible, if you could bring yourself to do it, since there's no other way of escape for 'ee. I feel I am so utterly worthless, so very greatly in the way." "Hush!" "Well, since you say no, I won't. I have no wish opposed to yours." He knew this to be true enough. Since the desperation of the night Her activities had dropped to zero, and there was no further rashness to be feared. Tess tried to busy herself again over the breakfast table, with more or less success, and they sat down both on the same side, so that their glances did not meet. There was at first something awkward in hearing each other eat and drink, but this could not be escaped. Moreover, the amount of eating done was small on both sides. Breakfast over, he rose, and telling her the hour at which he might be expected to dinner, went off to the miller's in a mechanical pursuance of the plan of studying that business which had been his only practical reason for coming here. When he was gone, Tess stood at the window, and presently saw his form crossing the great stone bridge which conducted to the mill premises. He sank behind it, crossed the railway beyond, and disappeared. Then, without a sigh, she turned her attention to the room, and began clearing the table and setting it in order. The charwoman soon came. Her presence was at first a strain upon Tess, but afterwards an alleviation. At 12:30 she left her assistant alone in the kitchen, and returning to the sitting-room, waited for the reappearance of Angel's form behind the bridge. About 1 he showed himself. Her face flushed, though he was a quarter of a mile off. She ran to the kitchen to get the dinner served by the time he should enter. He went first to the room where they had washed their hands together the day before, and as he entered the sitting-room the dish-covers rose from the dishes as if by his own motion. "How punctual!" he said. "Yes, I saw you coming over the bridge," said she. The meal was passed in commonplace talk of what he had been doing during the morning at the Abbey Mill, of the methods of bolting, and the old-fashioned machinery, which he feared would not enlighten him greatly on modern improved methods, some of it seeming to have been in use ever since the days it ground for the monks in the adjoining conventual buildings, now a heap of ruins. He left the house again in the course of an hour, coming home at dusk, and occupying himself through the evening with his papers. She feared she was in the way, and, when the old woman was gone, retired to the kitchen, where she made herself as busy as well she could for more than an hour. Clare's shape appeared at the door. "You must not work like this," he said. "You are not my servant, you are my wife." She raised her eyes and brightened somewhat. "I may think myself that, indeed?" she murmured, in piteous raillery. "You mean in name. Well, I don't want to be anything more." "You may think so, Tess. You are. What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said hastily, with tears in her accents. "I thought because I am not respectable, I mean. I told you I thought I was not respectable enough long ago, and on that account I didn't want to marry you, only you urged me." She broke into sobs, and turned her back to him. It would almost have won round any man but Angel Clare. Within the remote depths of his constitution, so gentle and affectionate as he was in general, there lay hidden a hard logical deposit, like a vein of metal in a soft loam, which turned the edge of everything that attempted to traverse it. It had blocked this new acceptance of the Church. It blocked his acceptance of Tess. Moreover, his affection itself was less fire than radiance, and, with regard to the other sex, when he ceased to believe, he ceased to follow, contrasting in this with many impressionable natures who remain sensuously infatuated with what they intellectually despise. He waited till her sobbing ceased. "I wish half the women in England were as respectable as you," he said in an ebullition of bitterness against womankind in general. "It isn't a question of respectability, but one of principle." He spoke such things as these and more of a kindred sort to her, being still swayed by the antipathetic wave which warps direct souls with such persistence when once their vision finds itself mocked by appearances. There was, it is true, underneath a back current of sympathy through which a woman of the world might have conquered him. But Tess did not think of this. She took everything as her deserts, and hardly opened her mouth. The firmness of her devotion to him was indeed most pitiful. Quick-tempered as she naturally was, nothing that he could say made her unseemly. She sought not her own, was not provoked, thought no evil of his treatment of her. She might just now have been apostolic charity herself, returned to a self-seeking modern world. This evening, night, and morning were passed precisely as the preceding ones had been passed. On one and only one occasion did she, the formerly free and independent Tess, venture to make any advances. It was on the third occasion of his starting, after a meal, to go out to the flour mill. As he was leaving the table he said "Good-bye," and she replied in the same words, at the same time inclining her mouth in the way of his. He did not avail himself of the invitation, saying, as he turned hastily aside, "I shall be home punctually." Tess shrank into herself as if she had been struck. Often enough he had tried to reach those lips against her consent. Often had he said gaily that her mouth and breath tasted of the butter and eggs and milk and honey on which she mainly lived, that he drew sustenance from them, and other follies of that sort. But he did not care for them now. He observed her suddenly shrinking, and said gently, "You know, I have to think of a course. It was imperative that we should stay together a little while, to avoid the scandal to you that would have resulted from our immediate parting. But you must see it is only for form's sake." "Yes," said Tess absently. He went out, and on his way to the mill stood still, and wished for a moment that he had responded yet more kindly, and kissed her once at least. Thus they lived through this despairing day or two, in the same house truly, but more widely apart than before they were lovers. It was evident to her that he was, as he had said, living with paralysed activities, in his endeavour to think of a plan of procedure. She was awe-stricken to discover such determination under such apparent flexibility. His consistency was indeed too cruel. She no longer expected forgiveness now. More than once she thought of going away from him during his absence at the mill, but she feared that this, instead of benefiting him, might be the means of hampering and humiliating him yet more if it should become known. Meanwhile Clare was meditating verily. His thought had been unsuspended. He was becoming ill with thinking, eaten out with thinking, withered by thinking, scourged out of all his former pulsating, flexuous domesticity. He walked about saying to himself, "What's to be done? What's to be done?" And by chance she overheard him. It caused her to break the reserve about their future which had hitherto prevailed. "I suppose you are not going to live with me long, are you, Angel?" she asked, the sunk corners of her mouth betraying how purely mechanical were the means by which she retained that expression of chastened calm upon her face. "I cannot," he said, "without despising myself, and what is worse, perhaps, despising you. I mean, of course, cannot live with you in the ordinary sense. At present, whatever I feel, I do not despise you. And let me speak plainly, or you may not see all my difficulties. How can we live together while that man lives? He being your husband in nature, and not I. If he were dead it might be different. Besides, that's not all the difficulty. It lies in another consideration, one bearing upon the future of other people than ourselves. Think of years to come, and children being born to us, and this past matter getting known, for it must get known. There is not an uttermost part of the earth but someone comes from it or goes to it from elsewhere. Well, think of wretches of our flesh and blood growing up under a taunt which they will gradually get to feel the full force of with their expanding years. What an awakening for them! What a prospect! Can you honestly say remain after contemplating this contingency? Don't you think we had better endure the ills we have than fly to others?" Her eyelids, weighted with trouble, continued drooping as before. "I cannot say remain," she answered. "I cannot. I had not thought so far." Tess's feminine hope, shall we confess it, had been so obstinately recuperative as to revive in her surreptitious visions of a domiciliary intimacy continued long enough to break down his coldness even against his judgment. Though unsophisticated in the usual sense, she was not incomplete, and it would have denoted deficiency of womanhood if she had not instinctively known what an argument lies in propinquity. Nothing else would serve her, she knew, if this failed. It was wrong to hope in what was the nature of strategy, she said to herself, yet that sort of hope she could not extinguish. His last representation had now been made, and it was, as she said, a new view. She had truly never thought so far as that, and his lucid picture of possible offspring who would scorn her was one that brought deadly conviction to an honest heart which was humanitarian to its centre. Sheer experience had already taught her that, in some circumstances, there was one thing better than to lead a good life, and that was to be saved from leading any life whatever. Like all who have been provisioned by suffering, she could, in the words of Monsieur Sully Prudhomme, hear a penal sentence in the fiat, "You shall be born," particularly if addressed to potential issue of hers. Yet such is the vulpine slyness of Dame Nature that, till now, Tess had been hoodwinked by her love for Clare into forgetting it might result in vitalizations that would inflict upon others what she had bewailed as a misfortune to herself. She therefore could not withstand his argument, and with the self-combating proclivity of the supersensitive, an answer thereto arose in Clare's own mind, and he almost feared it. It was based on her exceptional physical nature, and she might have used it promisingly. She might have added besides, "On an Australian upland or Texan plain, who is to know or care about my misfortunes, or to reproach me or you?" Yet, like the majority of women, she accepted the momentary presentiment as if it were the inevitable, and she may have been right. The intuitive heart of woman knoweth not only its own bitterness, but its husband's, and if these assumed reproaches were not likely to be addressed to him or to his by strangers, they might have reached his ears from his own fastidious brain. It was the third day of the estrangement. Some might risk the odd paradox that with more animalism he might have been the nobler man. We do not say it. Yet Clare's love was doubtless ethereal to a fault, imaginative to impracticability. With these natures corporeal presence is sometimes less appealing than corporeal absence, the latter creating an ideal presence that conveniently drops the defects of the real. She found that her personality did not plead her cause so forcibly as she had anticipated. The figurative phrase was true. She was another woman than the one who had excited his desire. "I have thought over what you say," she remarked to him, moving her forefinger over the tablecloth, her other hand, which bore the ring that mocked them both, supporting her forehead. "It is quite true, all of it. It must be. You must go away from me." "But what can you do?" "I can go home." Clare had not thought of that. "Are you sure?" he inquired. "Quite sure. We ought to part, and we may as well get it past and done. You once said that I was apt to win men against their better judgment, and if I am constantly before your eyes, I may cause you to change your plans in opposition to your reason and wish, and afterwards your repentance and my sorrow will be terrible." "And you would like to go home?" he asked. "I want to leave you and to go home." "Then it shall be so." Though she did not look up at him, she started. there was a difference between the proposition and the covenant, which she had felt only too quickly. "I feared it would come to this," she murmured, her countenance meekly fixed. "I don't complain, Angel. I think it best. What you said has quite convinced me. Yes, though nobody else should reproach me if we should stay together, yet somewhen, years hence, you might get angry with me for any ordinary matter, and knowing what you do of my bygones, you yourself might be tempted to say words, and they might be overheard, perhaps by my own children. Oh, what only hurts me now would torture and kill me then. I will go tomorrow. And I shall not stay here, though I didn't like to initiate it. I have seen that it was advisable we should part, at least for a while, till I can better see the shape that things have taken, and can write to you." Tess stole a glance at her husband. He was pale, even tremulous, but, as before, she was appalled by the determination revealed in the depths of this gentle being she had married, the will to subdue the grosser to the subtler emotion, the substance to the conception, the flesh to the spirit. Propensities, tendencies, habits were as dead leaves upon the tyrannous wind of his imaginative ascendancy. He may have observed her look, for he explained, "I think of people more kindly when I am away from them," adding cynically, "God knows, perhaps we shall shake down together some day for weariness. Thousands have done it." That day he began to pack up, and she went upstairs and began to pack also. Both knew that it was in their two minds that they might part the next morning for ever, despite the gloss of assuaging conjectures thrown over their proceeding, because they were of the sort to whom any parting which has an air of finality is a torture. He knew and she knew that, though the fascination which each had exercised over the other, on her part independently of accomplishments, would probably in the first days of their separation be even more potent than ever, time must attenuate that effect. The practical arguments against accepting her as a housemate might pronounce themselves more strongly in the boreal light of a remoter view. Moreover, when two people are once parted, have abandoned a common domicile and a common environment, new growths insensibly bud upward to fill each vacated place. Unforeseen accidents hinder intentions, and old plans are forgotten. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Chapter 37. Midnight came and passed silently, for there was nothing to announce it in the valley of the Froom. Not long after 1 o'clock there was a slight creak in the darkened farmhouse, once the mansion of the d'Urbervilles. Tess, who used the upper chamber, heard it and awoke. It had come from the corner step of the staircase, which, as usual, was loosely nailed. She saw the door of her bedroom open, and the figure of her husband across the stream of moonlight with a curiously careful tread. He was in his shirt and trousers only, and her first flush of joy died when she perceived that his eyes were fixed in an unnatural stare on vacancy. When he reached the middle of the room he stood still and murmured, in tones of indescribable sadness, "Dead, dead, dead." Under the influence of any strong disturbing force, Clare would occasionally walk in his sleep, and even perform strange acts, such as he had done on the night of their return from market, just before their marriage, when he re-enacted in his bedroom his combat with the man who had insulted her. Tess saw that continued mental distress had wrought him into that somnambulistic state now. Her loyal confidence in him lay so deep down in her heart that, awake or asleep, he inspired her with no sort of personal fear. If he had entered with a pistol in his hand, he would have scarcely disturbed her trust in his protectiveness. Clare came close and bent over her. "Dead, dead, dead," he murmured. After fixedly regarding her for some moments with the same gaze of unmeasurable woe, he bent lower, enclosed her in his arms, and rolled her on the sheet as in a shroud. Then, lifting her up from the bed with as much respect as one would show to a dead body, he carried her across the room, murmuring, "My poor Tess, my dearest darling Tess, so sweet, so good, so true." The words of endearment, withheld so severely in his waking hours, were inexpressibly sweet to her forlorn and hungry heart. If it had been to save her weary life, she would not, by moving or struggling, have put an end to the position she found herself in. Thus she lay in absolute stillness, scarcely venturing to breathe, and, wondering what he was going to do with her, suffered herself to be borne out upon the landing. "My wife, dead, dead," he said. He paused in his labours for a moment to lean with her against the banister. Was he going to throw her down? Self-solicitude was near extinction in her heart, and in the knowledge that he had planned to depart on the morrow, possibly for always, she lay in his arms in this precarious position with a sense rather of luxury than of terror. If they could only fall together, and both be dashed to pieces, how fit, how desirable! However, he did not let her fall, but took advantage of the support of the handrail to imprint a kiss upon her lips in the daytime scorned. Yet he clasped her with a renewed firmness of hold, and descended the staircase. The creak of the loose stair did not awaken him, and they reached the ground floor safely. Freeing one of his hands from his grasp of her for a moment, he slid back the door bar and passed out, slightly striking his stockinged toe against the edge of the door. But this he seemed not to mind, and, having room for extension in the open air, he lifted her against his shoulder that he could carry her with ease, the absence of clothes taking much from his burden. Thus he bore her off the premises in the direction of the river a few yards distant. His ultimate intention, if he had any, she had not yet divined, and she found herself conjecturing on the matter as a third person might have done. So easily had she delivered her whole being up to him that it pleased her to think he was regarding her as his absolute possession, to dispose of as he should choose. It was consoling, under the hovering terror of tomorrow's separation, to feel that he really recognized her now as his wife Tess, and did not cast her off, even if in that recognition he went so far as to aggregate to himself the right of harming her. Ah, now she knew what he was dreaming of. That Sunday morning, when he had borne her along through the water with the other dairymaids who had loved him nearly as much as she, if that were possible, which Tess could hardly admit. Clare did not cross the bridge with her, but proceeding several paces on the same side towards the adjoining mill, at length stood still on the brink of the river. Its rivers, in creeping down these miles of meadowland, frequently divided, serpentining in purposeless curves, looping themselves around little islands that had no name, returning and re-embodying themselves as a broad main stream further on. Opposite the spot to which he had brought her was such a general confluence, and the river was proportionately voluminous and deep. Across it was a narrow footbridge, but now the autumn flood had washed the handrail away, leaving the bare plank only, which, lying a few inches above the speeding current, formed a giddy pathway for even steady heads. And Tess had noticed from the window of the house in the daytime young men walking across it as a feat in balancing. Her husband had possibly observed the same performance. Anyhow, he now mounted the plank, and sliding one foot forward, advanced along it. Was he going to drown her? Probably he was. The spot was lonely, the river deep and wide enough to make such a purpose easy of accomplishment. He might drown her if he would. It would be better than parting tomorrow to lead severed lives. The swift stream raced and gyrated under them, tossing, distorting, and splitting the moon's reflected face. Spots of froth travelled past, and intercepted weeds waved behind the piles. If they could both fall together into the current now, their arms would be so tightly clasped together that they could not be saved. They would go out of the world almost painlessly, and there would be no more reproach for her, or to him for marrying her. His last half hour with her would have been a loving one, while if they lived till he awoke his daytime aversion would return, and this hour would remain to be contemplated only as a transient dream. The impulse stirred in her, yet she dared not indulge it. To make a movement that would have precipitated them both into the gulf. How she valued her own life had been proved, but his, she had no right to tamper with it. He reached the other side with her in safety. Here they were within a plantation which formed the abbey grounds, and, taking a new hold of her, he went onwards a few steps till they had reached the ruined choir of the abbey church. Against the north wall was the empty stone coffin of an abbot, in which every tourist with a turn for grim humour was accustomed to stretch himself. In this Clare carefully laid Tess. Having kissed her lips a second time, he breathed deeply, as if a greatly desired end were attained. Clare then lay down on the ground alongside, when he immediately fell into a deep dead slumber of exhaustion, and remained motionless as a log. The spurt of mental excitement which had produced the effort was now over. Tess sat up in the coffin. The night, though dry and mild for the season, was more than sufficiently cold to make it dangerous for him to remain here long in his half-clothed state. If he were left to himself, he would, in all probability, stay there till the morning, and be chilled to certain death. She had heard of such deaths after sleepwalking. But how could she dare to awaken him and let him know what he had been doing, when it would mortify him to discover his folly in respect of her? Tess, however, stepping out of her stone confine, shook him slightly, and was unable to arouse him without being violent. It was indispensable to do something, for she was beginning to shiver, the sheet being but a poor protection. Her excitement had in a measure kept her warm during the few minutes' adventure, but that beatific interval was over. It suddenly occurred to her to try persuasion, and accordingly she whispered in his ear with as much firmness and decision as she could summon, "Let us walk on, darling," at the same time taking him suggestively by the arm. To her relief he unresistingly acquiesced. Her words had apparently thrown him back into his dream, which henceforward seemed to enter into a new phase, wherein he fancied she had risen as a spirit, and was leading him to heaven. Thus she conducted him by the arm to the stone bridge in front of their residence, crossing which they stood at the manor house door. Tess's feet were quite bare, and the stones hurt her and chilled her to the bone. But Clare was in his woollen stockings, and appeared to feel no discomfort. There was no further difficulty. She induced him to lie down on his own sofa bed, and covered him up warmly, lighting a temporary fire of wood to dry any dampness out of him. The noise of these attentions, she thought, might awaken him, and secretly wished that they might. But the exhaustion of his mind and his body was such that he remained undisturbed. As soon as they met the next morning, Tess divined that Angel knew little or nothing of how far she had been concerned in the night's excursion, though, as regarded himself, he may have been aware that he had not lain still. In truth, he had awakened that morning from a sleep deep as annihilation, and during those first few moments in which the brain, like a Samson shaking himself, is trying its strength, he had some dim notion of an unusual nocturnal proceeding. But the realities of his situation soon displaced conjecture on the other subject. He waited in expectancy to discern some mental pointing. He knew that if any intention of his, concluded overnight, did not vanish in the light of morning, it stood on a basis approximating to one of pure reason, even if initiated by impulse of feeling, that it was so far, therefore, to be trusted. He thus beheld in the pale morning light the resolve to separate from her, not as a hot and indignant instinct, but denuded of the passionateness which had made it scorch and burn, standing in its bones, nothing but a skeleton, but none the less there. Clare no longer hesitated. At breakfast, and while they were packing the few remaining articles, he showed his weariness from the night's effort so unmistakably that Tess was on the point of revealing all that had happened. But the reflection that it would anger him, grieve him, stultify him, to know that he had instinctively manifested a fondness for her of which his common sense did not approve, that his inclination had compromised his dignity when reason slept, again deterred her. It was too much like laughing at a man when sober for his erratic deeds during intoxication. It just crossed her mind, too, that he might have a faint recollection of his tender vagary, and was disinclined to allude to it from a conviction that she would take amatory advantage of the opportunity it gave her of appealing to him anew not to go. He had ordered by letter a vehicle from the nearest town, and soon after breakfast it arrived. She saw in it the beginning of the end, the temporary end, at least, for the revelation of his tenderness by the incident of the night raised dreams of a possible future with him. The luggage was put on the top, and the man drove off, the miller and the old waiting woman expressing some surprise at their precipitate departure, which Clare attributed to his discovery that the millwork was not of the modern kind which he wished to investigate, a statement that was true so far as it went. Beyond this there was nothing in the manner of their leaving to suggest a fiasco, or that they were not going together to visit friends. Their route lay near the dairy farm from which they had started with such solemn joy in each other a few days back, and, as Clare wished to wind up his business with Mr Crick, Tess could hardly avoid paying Mrs Crick a call at the same time, unless she would excite suspicion in their unhappy state. To make the call as unobtrusive as possible, they left the cottage by the wicket leading down from the high road to the dairy house, and descended the track on foot side by side. The withy bed had been cut, and they could see over the stumps the spot to which Clare had followed her when he pressed her to be his wife, to the left the enclosure in which she had been fascinated by his harp, and far away, behind the cow stalls, the mead which had been the scene of their first embrace. The gold of the summer picture was now grey, the colours mean, the rich soil mud, and the river cold. Over the Barton gate the dairyman saw them, and came forward, throwing into his face the kind of jocularity deemed appropriate in Talbothays and its vicinity on the appearance of the newly married. Then Mrs Crick emerged from the house, and several others of their old acquaintance, though Marian and Retty did not seem to be there. Tess valiantly bore their sly attacks and friendly humours, which affected her far otherwise than they supposed. In the tacit agreement of husband and wife to keep their estrangement a secret, they behaved as would have been ordinary; and then, although she would rather there had been no word spoken on the subject, Tess had to hear in detail the story of Marian and Retty. The latter had gone home to her father's, and Marian was left to look for employment elsewhere. They feared that she would come to no good. To dissipate the sadness of this recital, Tess went and bade all her favourite cows good-bye, touching each of them with her hand, and she and Clare stood side by side at leaving, as if united body and soul. There would have been something peculiarly sorry in their aspect to one who should have seen it truly. Two limbs of one life as they outwardly were, his arm touching hers, her skirts touching him, facing one way as against all the dairy facing the other, speaking their adieu as "we," and yet sundered like the poles. Perhaps something unusually stiff and embarrassed in their attitude, some awkwardness in acting up to their profession of unity, different from the natural shyness in young couples, may have been apparent, for when they were gone Mrs Crick said to her husband, "How unnatural the brightness of her eyes did seem, and how they stood like waxen images and talked as if they were in a dream. Didn't it strike ye as 'twas so? Tess had always summat strange in her, and she's not now quite the proud young bride of a well-be-doing man." They re-entered the vehicle, and were driven along the roads towards Weatherbury and Stagfoot Lane, till they reached the Lane Inn, where Clare dismissed the fly and the man. They rested here a while, and entering the Vale, were next driven onward towards her home by a stranger who did not know their relations. At a midway point, when Nuttlebury had been passed, and where there were cross-roads, Clare stopped the conveyance, and said to Tess that if she meant to return to her mother's house, it was here that he would leave her. As they could not talk with freedom in the driver's presence, he asked her to accompany him for a few steps on foot along one of the branch roads. She assented, and directing the man to wait a few minutes, they strolled away. "Now let us understand each other," he said gently. "There is no anger between us, though there is that which I cannot endure at present. I will try to bring myself to endure it. I will let you know where I go as soon as I know myself, and if I can bring myself to bear it, if it is desirable, possible, I will come to you. But until I come to you, it would be better that you would not try to come to me." The severity of the decree seemed deadly to Tess. She saw his view of her clearly enough. He could regard her in no other light than that of one who had practised gross deceit upon him. Yet could a woman who had done even what she had done deserve all this? But she could contest the point with him no further. She simply repeated after him his own words. "Until you come to me, I must not try to come to you?" "Just so." "May I write to you?" "Oh yes, if you are ill or want anything at all. I hope that it will not be the case, so that it may happen that I write to you first." "I agree to the conditions, Angel, because you know best what my punishment ought to be. Only don't make it more than I can bear." This was all she said on the matter. If Tess had been artful, had she made a scene, fainted, wept hysterically in that lonely lane, notwithstanding the fury of fastidiousness with which he was possessed, he would probably not have withstood her. But her mood of long suffering made his way easy for him, and she herself was his best advocate. Pride so entered into her submission, which perhaps was a symptom of that reckless acquiescence in chance so apparent in the whole d'Urberville family, and the many effective chords which she could have stirred by an appeal were left untouched. The remainder of their discourse was on practical matters only. He now handed her a packet containing a fairly good sum of money which he had obtained from his bankers on the purpose. The brilliants, the interest in which seemed to be Tess's for her life only, if he understood the wording of the will, he advised her to let him send to a bank for safety, and to this she readily agreed. These things arranged, he walked with Tess back to the carriage and handed her in. The coachman was paid and told where to drive her. Taking next his own bag and umbrella, the sole articles he had brought with him hitherwards, he bade her good-bye, and they parted there and then. The fly moved creepingly up a hill, and Clare watched it go with an unpremeditated hope that Tess would look out of the window for one moment. But that she never thought of doing, would not have ventured to do, lying in a half-dead faint inside. Thus he beheld her recede, and in the anguish of his heart quoted a line from a poet, with particular emendations of his own. "God's not in his heaven, all's wrong with the world." When Tess had passed over the crest of the hill, he turned to go his own way, and hardly knew that he loved her still. End of chapter 37. Chapter 38 of Tess of the d'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the d'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Chapter 38. As she drove on through Blackmore Vale, and the landscape of her youth began to open around her, Tess aroused herself from her stupor. Her first thought was, how would she be able to face her parents? She reached a turnpike gate which stood upon the highway to the village. It was thrown open by a stranger, not by the old man who had kept it for many years, and to whom she had been known. He had probably left on New Year's Day, the date when such changes were made. Having received no intelligence lately from her home, she asked the turnpike keeper for news. "Oh, nothing, miss," he answered. "Marlott is Marlott still. Folks have died and that. John Durbeyfield, too, have a daughter married this week to a gentleman farmer. Not from John's own house, you know. They was married elsewhere, the gentleman being of that high standard that John's own folk was not considered well be-doing enough to have any part in it. The bridegroom seeming not to know how to have been discovered that John is a old and ancient nobleman himself by blood, with family skillingtons in their own vaults to this day, but done out of his property in the time of the Romans. However, Sir John, as we call him now, kept up the wedding day as well as he could, and stood treat to everybody in the parish, and John's wife sung songs at the pure dewdrop till past 11 at night." Hearing this, Tess felt so sick at heart that she could not decide to go home publicly in the fly with her luggage and belongings. She asked the turnpike keeper if she might deposit her things at his house for a while, and on his offering no objection, she dismissed her carriage and went on to the village alone by a back lane. At sight of her father's chimney she asked herself how she could possibly enter the house. Inside that cottage her relations were calmly supposing her far away on a wedding tour with a comparatively rich man, who was to conduct her to bouncing prosperity, while here she was, friendless, creeping up to the old door quite by herself, with no better place to go to in the world. She did not reach the house unobserved. Just by the garden hedge she was met by a girl who knew her, one of the 2 or 3 with whom she had been intimate at school. After making a few inquiries as to how Tess came there, her friend, unheeding her tragic look, interrupted with, "But where's thy gentleman, Tess?" Tess hastily explained that he had been called away on business, and leaving her interlocutor clambered over the garden hedge and thus made her way to the house. As she went up the garden path she heard her mother singing by the back door, coming in sight of which she perceived Mrs. Durbeyfield on the doorstep in the act of wringing a sheet. Having performed this without observing Tess, she went indoors, and her daughter followed her. The washing tub stood in the same old place on the same old quarter hogshead, and her mother, having thrown the sheet aside, was about to plunge her arms in anew. "Why, Tess, my child, I thought you was married really and truly by this time. We sent the cider." "Yes, mother, so I am." "Going to be?" "No, I am married." "Married? Then where's thy husband?" "Oh, he's gone away for a time." "Gone away? When was you married then? The day you said?" "Yes, Tuesday, mother." "And now 'tis only Saturday, and he's gone away?" "Yes, he's gone." "What's the meaning on that? Nation see such husbands as you seem to get, say I." "Mother!" Tess went across to Joan Durbeyfield, laid her face upon the matron's bosom, and burst into sobs. "I don't know how to tell 'ee, mother. You said to me, and wrote to me, that I was not to tell him. But I did tell him. I couldn't help it. And he went away." "Oh, you little fool, you little fool!" burst out Mrs. Durbeyfield, splashing Tess and herself in her agitation. "My good God, that ever I should have lived to say it! But I say it again, you little fool!" Tess was convulsed with weeping, the tension of so many days having relaxed at last. "I know it, I know," she gasped through her sobs. "But, oh, my mother, I could not help it. He was so good, and I felt the wickedness of trying to blind him as to what had happened. If it were to be done again, I should do the same. I could not, I dared not so sin against him." "But you sinned enough to marry him first." Yes, that's where my misery do lie. But I thought he could get rid of me by law if it were determined not to overlook it. And oh, if you could only half know how I loved him, how anxious I was to have him, and how wrong I was between caring so much for him and my wish to be fair to him." Tess was so shaken that she could get no further, and sank, a helpless thing, into a chair. Well, what's done cannot be undone. I'm sure I don't know why children of my bringing should all be bigger simpletons than other people's, not to know better than to blab such a thing as that, when he couldn't have found out till too late." Here Mrs. Durbeyfield began shedding tears on her own account as a mother to be pitied. "What your father will say I don't know," she continued, "and he's been talking about the wedding up at Rolliver's and the Pure Drop every day since, and about his family getting back to their rightful position through you, poor silly man. And now you've made this mess of it. The Lord. And as if to bring matters to a focus, Tess's father was heard approaching at that moment. He did not, however, enter immediately, and Mrs. Durbeyfield said that she would break the bad news to him herself, Tess keeping out of sight for the present. After her first burst of disappointment, Joan began to take the mishap as she had taken Tess's original trouble, as she would have taken a wet holiday, or failure in the potato crop, as a thing which had come upon them irrespective of desert or folly, a chance external impingement to be borne with, not a lesson. Tess retreated upstairs, and beheld casually that the beds had been shifted and new arrangements made. Her old bed had been adapted for 2 younger children. There was no place here for her now. The room below being unceilinged, she could hear most of what went on there. Presently her father entered, apparently carrying a live hen. He was a foot haggler now, having been obliged to sell his second horse, and he travelled with his basket on his arm. The hen had been carried about this morning, as it was often carried, to show people that he was in his work, though it had lain, with its legs tied, under the table at Rolliver's for more than an hour. "We've just had up a story about," Durbeyfield began, and thereupon related in detail to his wife a discussion which had arisen at the inn about the clergy, originated by the fact of his daughter having married into a clerical family. "They was formerly styled Sir, like my own ancestry," he said, "though nowadays their true style, strictly speaking, is Clark only." As Tess had wished that no great publicity should be given to the event, he had mentioned no particulars. He hoped she would remove that prohibition soon. He proposed that the couple should take Tess's own name, d'Urberville, as uncorrupted. It was better than her husband's. He asked if any letter had come from her that day. Then Mrs Durbeyfield informed him that no letter had come, but Tess, unfortunately, had come herself. When at length the collapse was explained to him, a sullen mortification, not unusual with Durbeyfield, overpowered the influence of the cheering glass. Yet the intrinsic quality of the event moved his touchy sensitiveness less than its conjectured effect upon the minds of others. "To think now that this was to be the end on't," said Sir John, "and I with a family vault under that there church of Kingsbere as big as Squire Jollen's ale cellar, and my folk lying there in 6s and 7s, as genuine county bones and marrow as any recorded in history. And now to be sure what they fellows at Rolliver's and the Pure Drop will say to me, how they'll squint and glane and say, 'This is your mighty match, is it? This is your getting back to the true level of your forefathers in King Norman's time.' I feel this is too much, Joan. I shall put an end to myself, title and all. I can bear it no longer. But can she make him keep her if he's married her?" "Why, yes, but she won't think of doing that." "Do ye think he really have married her, or is it like the first?" Poor Tess, who had heard as far as this, could not bear to hear any more. The perception that her word could be doubted even here, in her own parental house, set her mind against the spot as nothing else could have done. How unexpected were the attacks of destiny! And if her father doubted her a little, would not neighbours and acquaintance doubt her much? Oh, she could not live long at home. A few days accordingly were all that she allowed herself here, at the end of which time she received a short note from Clare, informing her that he had gone to the north of England to look at a farm. In her craving for the lustre of her true position as his wife, and to hide from her parents the vast extent of the division between them, she made use of this letter as her reason for again departing, leaving them under the impression that she was setting out to join him. Still further to screen her husband from any imputation of unkindness to her, she took 25 of the £50 Clare had given her, and handed the sum over to her mother, as if the wife of a man like Angel Clare could well afford it, saying that it was a slight return for the trouble and humiliation she had brought upon them in years past. With this assertion of her dignity she bade them farewell, and after that there were lively doings in the Durbeyfield household for some time on the strength of Tess's bounty. her mother saying, and indeed believing, that the rupture which had arisen between the young husband and wife had adjusted itself under their strong feeling that they could not live apart from each other. Chapter 38